So if your brain is not already on fire with some of the things I've already covered about web development, you might want to take a look at some of these mobile development techniques. As I mentioned, I am recently moving into this area and I had resisted it for a long time because I was hoping that things would settle onto the web and that we would continue doing web development and having the browsers become a little bit more efficient at working on devices like smartphones. And that is the case. It is improving, but there are still features that a native application that's developed for the phone can execute much better. And we, do all kinds of things with our phones. We use the GPS on it. We play games that often use features like the accelerometer. And we want to make sure we don't bog down the device. The applications need to be lightweight. They need to be fast. They need to do what the user needs it to do in the time that they need to do it. They need to be able to get to the answers very quickly. So I started delving into iPhone application development this year, and I started working with Xcode and Swift because I felt like it was the easiest way to move into doing this kind of application development. It was not easy, and it has become easier as I've started working with it and become familiar with the processes, but it's pretty different than doing HTML, CSS, and even JavaScript. But my background in programming actually helps understand how some of these processes work. So I'm going to go over a few things about application development, and then I will try to do a brief demonstration of some very, very basic features of using Xcode and Swift. So this works only on Apple computers because this is the Apple development environment. And you would download Xcode from the App Store, on the Apple App Store. It's a program that you would put on your computer, your Apple computer. And Swift is the language that became the main development language in 2014. Before that, it was called Objective-C. And the way you do development for apps is a combination of a visual interface and objects with coding, which I'll show you in the demonstration. And so here's an example of what I mean by a visual interface with coding. This is the Xcode interface, and there are different areas. At first, it's very confusing when you get into Xcode because there's so many different types of places that you can do things, and you can hide things and open them up, and getting your interface set up the way you want it and being able to find things can be very difficult. But as you get used to the interface, it becomes easier. So you can see here, I have a storyboard over here on the left, and that sort of simulates what the app is going to look like. And this is one view controller, basically one scene or storyboard controlled by one view controller. And the code for that view controller is over here in the main view controller that you would see in this project navigator. But notice there is a bunch of icons up here you could click on that would open different things that would show up over here. Also, there are these little slider buttons that let you open and close different parts of the view in case you need them or don't need them. And then over here on the right, we have a coding area. So this is the actual view controller, and this is where the coding goes. So, some of these things are just text, but some of them are actual switches that do things. And the code for those happen over here in the view controller. And some of these things are things that actually change with the answer that you get. You can use a library over here to pull things onto the screen, and then you connect them up in the code. And then there are different options here that you can use to look at attributes or connections to be able to troubleshoot your code. So it does get very complex, but it is not impossible. And so if you look at the main interface areas that you need to use when you start working in Xcode, you have the editor area, which is the center area, and it can be split between the storyboard and the view controller for coding. You have this toolbar area up here that has some different tools that you can choose to connect, as well as the way that you can simulate the application. You can actually start it and see it in a simulator, and I'll show you how that works. You have this navigator area that lets you choose which files that you're working on. You have a debugging area at the bottom that gives you some clues if things aren't working. And then this utility area over here allows you to look at different options that you might have or to work within the library. So again, there's a lot here. It just takes some time and some patience in working with it. So the techniques for using Swift are similar to JavaScript, but not the same. You still use variables, but with Swift, you have to declare the data type for each of the variables, whether it's like an integer or a string. So you'll see some examples of those over here. And concatenation actually works a little bit differently in Swift. Generally, they'll create things in a string, and then this backward slash here escapes something that you want to include as a variable. And so, I just want to say hello, Cindy, and put the value of the variable name here in this greeting. And you can do math. You have if statements. They're very similar to what we have in JavaScript. And then there are also loops. And so quite often we look at things like an array. They would call it a list. And you'd have 3 items in here. And then you would be able to access those items the same way that we do in JavaScript with an index number. And then getting the numbers of them, the length in Swift is actually called count. So again, similar concepts, however, different syntax that you have to be able to make that transition. And then there are a lot of different components, and I'll demonstrate a couple of these. Mainly you use labels, buttons, text fields allow the user to input something. You would use maybe switches for yes, no answers, or sliders to have a range of answers. Use an image view to put an image on the screen. And then if you need to have multiple storyboards, multiple scenes, then you would use multiple view controllers to be able to code on those scenes. And then finally, the simulator is what actually shows you the result of what you're working on. And it simulates the device that it's going to go to. So again, it gets a lot more complicated than this, but these are the general features of mobile development. Now, there are other mobile options, and of course, people develop for the Android platform. What we're doing with Xcode and Swift is purely for iPhone. And obviously, if you're a company, you want to be able to handle both and anything else that comes down the road. I mean, that's also a challenge of the native app environment. So the Android Studio works with the Java programming language, which is not JavaScript. Those are completely different languages. So knowing Java and working with the Android Studio, the interface has a similar look to it that Xcode has. So it's a similar visual interface combined with code. And then there are some other projects out there that help people take their websites or take their individual apps and create them cross-platform. Previously, there were these sort of wrapper applications like PhoneGap that put in a native wrapper around websites. I think the industry has moved away from those. And what we have now seen is React and React Native. And React is a JavaScript library that's hosted by Facebook. And it seems a lot of application development is going toward React. It's a complicated library, and being able to use that for mobile development with React Native is also complicated. So that's on my list of things to learn as I go forward with mobile development. But I have found that as I started working with Xcode, and I'll move over to Xcode right now. So I'm starting it up right here. I have found that it is not as hard as I thought it was when I got started. So I think taking baby steps with it and playing with the application will help you. So when I opened up Xcode, I just said, create a new project. And I'm going to pick a single view app. There are other templates you can start here, but the single view app is the most flexible. And then I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it test. And I have set up these identifiers previously. What you really just need to have here is something that's unique. So if you have a URL, just do it in the backwards format because you want to go from the most general to the most specific in the direction. And your language will be Swift. And then just pick where you're going to save it. And then the interface will come up and you'll have a bunch of general options here in the center. But what we mainly want to do is start with a storyboard. So I'll click over here and I should be able to get a storyboard coming up in the center. And depending on which device I'm developing for, I could actually go ahead and switch that up here. So I would see a different size if I just wanted to be for iPhone 8. And when I tested it, it would do it at the iPhone 8 size. As I mentioned previously, there are these little slider boxes here, and I can click that. That would move away from this area here, because I don't need it right now, and I really want to think about optimizing the real estate of the screen depending on what kind of screen you're working on. What I want to do also now is open the view controller at the same time and have it in that split screen. So if I hit the option button and click view controller, it will open both of those in the same screen. And I can adjust percents here. I can move it around. I mean, as you get more and more scenes on here, you're going to have to work with your visual. And you also notice over here to the right are all those different options. If I click on the storyboard, I have all the different options that are associated with the storyboard. Quite often it's this area here that is the attributes inspector. If you hover over them, they tell you what they are. And whatever you have selected will have different options here, very much like a Photoshop or other program you might have used before. And then we have the library down here of different types of objects that you can bring, different types of components that you can bring onto the site. So if you look at the code, you have a very general view controller set up, and everything really happens inside this view controller that will be associated with this particular scene. They give you two override functions here, and these are the things that you want to have happen when the view loads, if there's anything specific, and then everything else will kind of happen up here in the main view controller. So let's do a quick exercise where we put some things on the screen and work with them. I am going to search for a label, and that is really just text that you can put on the screen. And a text item can just be text that just sits there, or it can also be an outlet for something. It can be something that will change later. So if I click on this, I can get the item to be able to be edited. And I can say welcome on here. And I can also modify that over on the side here. It now says welcome. I can change that to anything I want. And I can also, if I wanted, adjust the colors. I can bring up this little color picker here. And if I wanted to change the font or make it bold or something like that, that could also be happening here. So these are just different attributes associated with the item that you have selected. Very much like a program like Photoshop or InDesign. So this is going to be an outlet that we're going to create, and we're going to have it change to the name of the person when they input their name into a field. So we'll grab another label while we're here that's just going to be text to say the word name. And get that in there again. I can do it here on the label itself, and I can work with the size to drag it out, or I can do it over here where it indicates the text that's on that label. And then the next thing I want is a text field. So I can search for text field, drag that up onto the screen next to the word name, and I can drag this out again. And that's all we have to do to it to put it on the screen. We're going to actually have it accept a name here. And then the third thing we want is a button, because we need the user after they put in their name to submit the button. So we can position that where we want. We can double click it and change this to say submit or go or whatever we want it to say. So we've got our interface, as basic and ugly as it is right now. We have our interface set up, and now it's time to start connecting things to the code. So we have a few things to do. We need to take this welcome button and connect it into the code, into the view controller over here, and make it an outlet. So I'm going to do a control, click and drag, and put it into the view controller, and I'm going to make it an outlet, and I'm going to call it greeting. Spell greeting correctly. And again, I can name this anything I wanted, but this created an outlet variable greeting of the type UI label. And I'm going to do the same thing for the text field. I'm going to click and drag that also into the view controller. That's also going to be an outlet. I'm going to call that name. And it's a UI text field, and also an outlet. And then the third thing we want to connect up is the button, because this button is going to tell it what to do. And this is actually going to be an action. So if I click here and drag from the button into the code and name this an action, and I will give it the name button, and I can make it a UI button, and there are different events here. You can go with the default touch-up inside. It just has a lot of different events depending on what you want the user doing with that button. And you connect that. And when a button is created, it actually creates a function for you to put the actions in that you want it to do when that button is pressed. Now I've already created the actions that I wanted. I copied and saved them here. I'm creating a variable called my name, and it's going to get the text from name and put it into the variable my name. Now let is the indicator for a constant, which is different than a variable. They work kind of the same way, but we're not going to be modifying what's in my name any further than this, so it's going to be considered a constant. And then I have to be able to modify the text of greeting. Remember, we created this welcome as the greeting. And now instead of it just saying welcome, we want it to say the string welcome with whatever is the result that came from grabbing the value from that text field, my name. And we do that by creating the string, opening and closing with quotation marks, but escaping the string by putting a backward slash and then parentheses with the name of the variable inside it. So if we try to test this, I will hit the play button up here in the left corner, and you'll see that another application is opening, the simulator. It may take a few minutes for it to come up, not minutes, but actually a few seconds for it to come up, so be patient. And then your application will come up. It builds your application and it runs it for you, and it looks like a little phone. So if I click in this field here and I type in my name, and I can do it with the keyboard or this little keyboard that pops up, and I submit, it has changed it here on the device. However, I did not make my welcome label large enough. So this is a pretty common problem that I experience with students. To fix that, you just come over and make that a little bit wider. Let's make it pretty wide in case there's a big name. We can stop the build from the simulator that's already going, and then we run it again to see if we have fixed that problem. So it comes up again, and I'll type in a different name. Taylor, submit that, and then it's saying welcome Taylor. So it's that simple to get something to be very quickly interactive with a user. Just a few things that you have to understand in terms of connecting the labels and the text fields into the code and making them outlets, and then connecting a button as an action, and then just knowing a couple lines of code that grab the value from the form element, the text field, and change the outlet of the greeting. And it's very, very similar to manipulating the DOM, the stuff that I showed in JavaScript. Now there are many, many other things that you can pull from this library, and I'm also exploring them myself. Probably the next thing you want to know is, wow, I'd really love to have an image on this screen. And so you can grab an image view, put that on the screen, and to be able to get an image, you have to have the asset folder include your image. So I'm just clicking over here in the project navigator, and what I need to do is drag an image into this. So let's see, I've got some images from South by Southwest. I'll just drag a picture of some of my students working over here. And then if I go back to my main storyboard now, and I click on the image view, I should be able to find the image over here now. Here it is, group, because it's now in that folder, and I can put that image on the screen here. And I've come up with different programs to show students how you can programmatically change what's in that image view depending on the answer that somebody gives you in a form. And there are many, many other things you can do. So I have my course site, mobile.cindy.digital, that you can go to and go through step by step and get even more involved in how to create iPhone applications. But this is just a very basic introduction so that you'll understand how the Xcode interface works and a little bit of how you can start implementing some Swift programming techniques. So good luck, and I hope some of you will get started with this.